I'm Marianne Williamson, and do not be alone with Jay Kogan.
Don't be alone with Jay Kogan.
Hi there, and welcome to Don't Be Alone with Jay Kogan. I am your humble host, Jay Kogan. That's right, I just had to think about it for a second. I thank you all for being so kind about the show. I get a lot of letters and I get a lot of texts and emails from people saying how much they love the show, and it makes me feel good. If you would like to be one of those people who make me feel good or bad by writing me something horrible, please feel free to email me at dbawjk@gmail.com. Also, if you like the show, please subscribe or like or click or whatever kind of button you have to do to initiate the idea that you are positive about the show. Because when you do it, then other people do it, and then it makes the show better. You can also share the show. That's a great idea. If you like this show and at the end of it, you see somebody else should hear it, send it to somebody. That's how most people get their stuff these days. They don't get advertising. They get friends telling them stuff. So send this show to someone if you like it, and if you hate it, send it to someone you hate. Getting out is getting out. That's the best part. Today we have a very interesting show, a wonderful show for you. Normally we usually have people from the world of show business on, but today we have somebody from the world of I guess, inner healing on. Inner healing and kind of politics, but mostly inner healing. Marianne Williamson, who became an expert on the Course of Miracles and brought that to the fore and brought it to Los Angeles and then the world, is here today. She's our guest. She's amazing. She's written 16 books. The last one was called The Mystic Jesus, The Mind of Love, and it's all about the wisdom you can find from Jesus, just like she's written about the wisdom you can find in many other places. I respect her a lot. She has been a guide to a lot of people I know, and she's been a good friend of mine, and she's also my cousin. I married into that family, not just to get to her. I also kind of like my wife, but partly to get to her. But, I come at it not as a devotee of anything in particular. I like wisdom wherever it comes from, but my cousin Marianne has a lot of wisdom. So we'll be right back with Marianne Williamson right after this.
Don't be alone with Jay Kogan.
Marianne Williamson, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's such it's a thrill for me to have somebody who's not a show business comedian jerk sitting in that seat.
Although I would think that some show business comedian jerks are pretty entertaining, interesting people.
They are, but I don't come to them for the spiritual depth that I do for you, or the political wisdom that I do for you. Many of our listeners do not know that through marriage, we are related.
We are, absolutely. We're mishpucha.
And so I've gotten to know you over the past 30 years. There's never been a time when I didn't think you were insightful.
Thank you.
Or funny.
Thank you.
Interesting, and had something amazing to say. And so that's a thrill to have you here. And I listen to you all the time. Like, I listen to you on Kathy Heller's program, and I listen to you on
She's great.
She's great. She used to work for me.
Oh, wow.
I gave her she wrote the theme song to a show I did called The Troop.
Wow.
But now she's this big podcaster person.
Yeah.
About, I don't know. She talks about abundance, I think, most of the time. But it's great to have you here. And I wanted to ask you many things. This show is about me solving my problems. And so you're here to solve my problems. The core problem is that I am somebody who wants to have faith and believe in a higher power and all this stuff, but I just don't. And it's kind of like the universe, I believe, part of me believes like we can't just be here for no reason. We can't just, but part of me doesn't. It's like I would like to step further in to believing that idea that there's a God, or there's a faith, or the universe has a plan for us to, and you talk a lot about, if you step into your power, if you step into what you're trying to do, the universe will sort of help you achieve your goals, right? So like, here I am. Am I supposed to be doing this? Is podcasting what God wants me to do?
Well, first of all, if there is a God,
Yes.
your opinion about whether or not there is a God is irrelevant.
Cool. Completely.
So there is or there isn't. If you want to believe that there is something more, believe something more.
Right.
If you don't believe there's something more, don't believe there's something more. Neither one of those opinions is really going to affect God at breakfast. You know,
Right.
it's not. This is just a mind game you're playing with yourself. That's
Right.
all
No, but
it
I
is,
mean,
and it's
okay.
fine. I don't have any judgment on the mind game, actually.
No, but if I might pursue it a little harder,
Well,
if I knew there was like, the universe was looking over my shoulder saying, Jay, time's a ticking and you should be doing some stuff.
Well, it goes the other way. It's not I might pursue it harder if I believed. It's rather if I pursued it harder, I might believe. For instance, you wake up in the morning and you say, okay, just in case there's a God, guide me today. Let every situation, every circumstance, every relationship, if there's something more for me to see, if there's some way I could be of use to you, if there's a way I could see some love and some miracles here, I'm willing just in case.
I do start my day every day. You know why? Because you send me a message every day in my email, a little the contemplative prayer, and I listen to it every day. And sometimes at the end, I speak along with the end bit of it. So I'm doing my part to start my day there.
You're very Jewish. You're Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof and the opening scene.
Right. Right. Yeah.
This is just how Jews are.
I guess so.
We don't, as my father said, we don't believe in miracles, but we rely upon them.
Well, this is true. And I do kind of believe in miracles. It's kind of interesting. Like, I think that our lives are full of miracles, and after we see enough of them, we go somewhere else, and that's good. I kind of believe that.
I will say the Course in Miracles says belief in itself is meaningless.
Right.
It's experience that matters. And if you open yourself with love and with generosity, beautiful things happen.
There's my problem. No love and generosity.
There's a lot
I
of
got
love
to put
and
up the wall
generosity.
there.
No, there's a lot of love and generosity. There's a lot. And that's why you have a lot of abundance in your life.
Let me ask you, turn a little bit more to Jesus, because every podcast I always turn to Jesus. Your book, Mystic Jesus.
Yes.
What made you, a nice Jewish girl, want to investigate Jesus?
Okay.
I'm fascinated by Jesus too, by the way.
He was one of us, Jay.
I get it.
Although there are people trying to deny that. It's unbelievable what's going on there. Okay, I'm a student and a writer and speaker about a set of books called A Course in Miracles. And A Course in Miracles is not a religion. It is a psychological mind training based on universal spiritual themes. And it does use traditional Christian language. So when I first saw the book, I was like, oh, this is a Christian book. But then when I picked it up again, you learn very quickly, no, this is not a religion. And Jesus is represented, first of all, this is not an exclusive Jesus. And it's a Jesus who is seen as a kind of psychological guide. And so that's the first answer that I learned very quickly as a student of the Course in Miracles, that there's nothing in here making me less of a Jew or to identify less as a Jew or anything along that line. But secondly, this book was written in response to a phone call I got from my editor at my publisher, who said, we're getting a lot of calls from booksellers who say that people are coming into bookstores saying, do you have anything about Jesus that isn't like Christian?
Right.
Isn't that fascinating? And so the quote unquote unchurched has been the largest spiritual and religious denomination for a long time.
Yeah.
So my career has really rested in many ways on the fact that when a lot of people, understandably, rejected a lot of the doctrine and dogma of organized religion over the last few decades, people then ended up feeling they threw away the baby with the bathwater. It's like, no, I didn't want to not have a relationship with God. I just didn't want all the wrappings.
Right.
And
sometimes the story of the Bible or even the Old Testament, the New Testament, those stories, some people take them as gospel, no pun intended.
Well, those stories tend to be deeply metaphysically,
right.
psychologically
but people say,
relevant.
No, and that's the point where you lose a lot of people.
Well, it's the doctrine and the dogma. You need to do this, you need to do that. I think a deeper understanding of the almost Jungian significance of these stories, which is part of what I write and talk about, is actually very profound in terms of not only understanding ourselves, but in terms of what's happening in the world today.
Right.
So I think actually, your wife was saying to me a few minutes ago, talking about the fires and saying there's something almost biblical about this. I mean, we use those expressions because we instinctively and intuitively know that there's a deeper drama going on this planet.
Maybe that's why people are going to the bookstores. And my new book, Jesus' Biggest Bloopers, is going to be...
Somebody needs to write. What would be an example of a Jesus blooper? Please do tell.
Well, he meant to turn the water into Hawaiian punch, not wine. And that was a mistake. So,
Have you seen that thing on the internet? Remember Art Linkletter?
Sure.
An Art Linkletter asking that little girl her favorite story in the Bible. Have you seen that one?
I don't know this.
It's a famous little viral thing. So Art Linkletter invites this little girl, what's your favorite story in the Bible? And she says, when Jesus turned the water into wine. And he said, really? Now, what do you think that means? And she said, when you run out of wine, just get on your knees and pray to Jesus.
Well, there you go.
But actually...
That's a savior.
Actually, if you actually look at the modern metaphysical, and actually it would be ancient as well, to be honest, perspective on that story, this is an example. What does it mean that Jesus turned the water into wine?
Right.
What it means is that when you are in the consciousness that is beyond the falsity of this world, even on the structure of worldly events, things will recalibrate in the direction of the highest.
Well, you said something recently I heard on some show, or maybe it's coming from your new book. You talk about love. Our reasons for being here is to love and to be loved and to open ourselves up to that.
Right.
Right? And to not sort of let anger and pettiness and, this person did, all that kind of stuff.
That gets in the way. That's like Michelangelo was asked how he created a sculpture. So there's the trip to the quarry, and Michelangelo said that in his mind, God had already created Pieta, David, Moses, and that his job was just to get rid of all the excess marble surrounding the statue that God had already created. So the idea here is that the love in you, Shekinah, Holy Spirit, whatever you want to call it, Christ mind, Buddha mind, is an unalterable and undeletable aspect of God's mind and therefore your reality. The idea here is that we have received, living on this earth, so many thoughts that have led us to the negativity that you just described, controlling, negative, fearful, aggressive, violent, whatever, and that enlightenment is an unlearning. Enlightenment is a dissolving of all those layers of miscreation and misperception that stand in front of the light that's already there. You don't have to create the light within you. God has already created it.
I give myself a B+ on that. Like, I do think I'm pretty good at putting that
Me too.
stuff away.
I give myself a B+ too.
Yeah,
actually.
we're human, but it's like,
it's not.
I'm not racked by fear. I'm not racked by anger. I'm not racked by things, but things get in the way. Some things get in the way.
The human experience is complicated. Truth is simple, but life is complicated.
And if I were given a giant slab of marble and told God is going to guide you on what to chip away, we would have a very messy piece of marble.
It's like I watched last night. I was watching online, actually, the news on SNL, Saturday Night Live last night. Right. Usually I love it. Michael Che, Colin Yost. I mean, it's one of those things that, okay, at least I'll have a couple minutes of escape. You can't even laugh at this stuff. It's so bad.
Yeah.
So at this point, people such as yourself, and I don't mean this that we shouldn't have humor, and I don't mean this like we shouldn't laugh or have fun, but people like you are not the problem, Jay. People like you are the answer. And I think that there is, and I think you named it yourself, it's not that we're perfect human beings, but we have the seriousness to recognize what is going on, and we are willing to claim that, hey, the people who have made the difference in history before us, they weren't perfect human beings either, but they showed up.
Right. Well, since you brought it up, this moment in time, particularly now, I'm not sure when this show will be aired, it's very difficult to walk through the world without feeling an anxiety of like something's going on. And I don't know that we have, even collectively yet, have the wherewithal to fight what's happening.
Well, let's step back for just a moment. It's very difficult for you. It's very difficult for me. But the difficulty for us is small compared to the difficulty for people who at this moment already are being traumatized
and targeted. Yeah.
And targeted by the actions of this president. Yeah. So I think that there's something here about us saying, given that we are not living our lives totally, completely at the effect of this, let's make ourselves available for whatever action, which comes from, I believe, that divine guidance in all of us. Just whether you call it divine, conscience, whatever, that will enable us to discern the actions that we're called upon to take.
Things show up in front of us.
That's right.
I'll say, this is something we can do then.
That's right.
But do we wait or do we be proactive?
No, we are living in an urgent moment. Right. There is no, I've been saying, as you know, having run for president and so forth, I've been saying we can't wait for a long time.
Right.
But people, we were taking these little incremental approaches, and that was traditional establishment thinking. Oh, we're doing great. We were not doing great. Right. This has been coming for a while now. That's a whole, conversation about the way I believe some people allowed this big hole to develop, and Trump just walked right in. Be that as it may, we are where we are. And I think that you and I both, and I'm sure many of your listeners, already live within vortexes of power, right? You being here in LA, your industry, any of us who have a professional identity, any of us who have any kind of a public interface, we don't have to know what yet, but we can be in an attitude of complete receptivity and availability. And I think that's the point.
I agree. But I feel like it's only a couple days in.
Well,
and I'm still like I hear, and I've stopped listening to the news, and yet I hear alarming things every day anyway.
And this was the strategy, and it is shock and awe, and it is designed to make people feel don't even think about trying to go against this.
Here's a question for you, because you went into 2 presidential campaigns,
yes,
knowing the odds were stacked against you, knowing that and maybe you knew more now than you did when you first started, how the forces of media and politics would do their best to sort of push you aside.
Actually, it's not quite like that. When I ran in 2020, yes, I was a minor candidate. As a minor and knew that, of course. Mm-hmm. But I was given, more than not, a fair shot. I had a CNN town hall. I think for a minor candidate, I was given adequate exposure. I thought fair exposure on CNN and MSNBC. I mentioned CNN and MSNBC because if you're a Democratic presidential candidate and the Democratic electorate out there in America never sees you on CNN or MSNBC, to them you do not exist.
Right.
So there were the smears, there was the mockery, but all within the purview of you walked into the kitchen, of course there's going to be heat. Okay. So I actually walked in 2024 expecting just to be given a fair shot.
Right.
Right? So the U.S. Constitution says that in order to become president, you have to have been born here, lived here for 14 years, and 35 or older. That's all.
Right.
Nothing about you have to have been a lawyer, you had to have been a governor, you had nothing. So that's the qualification as determined by James Madison. George Washington had warned us in his farewell address about political parties, saying that they could form factions of men more loyal to their party than to their country. So when I went in 2024, I didn't expect the viciousness,
right,
the viciousness of the pushback. So I think what happened, I announced, and I was on Jonathan Karl on ABC the next morning. Somebody saw that and went, first of all, so they create these narratives, they concoct these narratives. So what the DNC decided, and the DNC is a private corporation, it should not have the power to make such a decision. And they promulgated it in partnership with their media partners at CNN and MSNBC. We don't primary incumbent presidents. I'm sure you know many smart people who said that to you over and, oh, no, Jay, we have to go with Biden because we don't primary. Well, excuse me, Eugene McCarthy and Bobby Kennedy Sr. primaried Lyndon Johnson, who was a sitting president. That is what led him to drop out.
Right.
People say, yeah, but we didn't win. Well, you had the assassination of Bobby Kennedy Sr. in there. I so you can't compare it.
Right.
Okay, so that was the first lie. Second lie, about me, she's a spoiler. You can't. Excuse me, remember 7th grade civics, you can't be a spoiler if you're running as a Democrat. There was such a thrall.
Yeah.
There was such a codependent acquiescence to whatever the DNC said. Democracy is about duke it out. You're supposed to have debates. So we had debates in 2020. I assumed there would be debates in 2024. And we would have seen much, much sooner the state of the president's mind. Let Bobby in there, let me in there, let Dean Phillips in there, and I just think it's astonishing, all these senators and governors who just knew they had to wait their turn, who are then going to come out in 2028 and talk about how they have what it takes to fight the insurance companies. They didn't have what it took to stand up to the DNC.
Right.
So,
what is the biggest misconception you think people who don't know you had about you?
Lightweight, crystal lady, told the one that hurts my heart is, here in Los Angeles, I was very active in the AIDS crisis. There are people who have said that I told the AIDS patients not to take their medicine, that the only reason they had it was they didn't pray enough or something like that. This crystal lady stuff, kind of lightweight, mean, you know. If you really see how it works and how they create these narratives and the hits and I'll tell you something. When you run for president, this didn't happen in 2020, but it happened in 24. The FBI calls. And the FBI says, we'd like you to come down to the building. We want to give you a briefing, and we're going to give the same briefing to every other presidential candidate. And they describe things that they say, these things either are happening or will be happening. This is not a might happen. We wouldn't have called you down to the Bureau if it was just a might happen. These things either are happening or will be happening. They describe things, and then they say the three main suspects are Russia, China, or Iran. I recognized at least the beginnings of all three of those things, and I said to the gentleman, I recognize all three of those, and they're not coming from those countries. They're coming from right here. And he looked at me like this. They infiltrate campaigns. They kick you off ballots. I think a lot of people don't understand how that works. The Secretary of State, in a primary election, the Secretary of State says to the party, okay, who've you got? Who do you want on your ballot? So there were some very righteous party chairman who says, well, we've got Marianne Williamson, we've got Dean Phillips, and so forth. And there were a few, who said, Joe Biden. And the Secretaries of State said, well, what about this Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson? Oh, no, we're going with Joe Biden. And of course, in Wisconsin, Dean took them to court. The Supreme Court made them reinstate him. I didn't have the tens of thousands of dollars in my campaign coffer to challenge it in court.
Well, the Republicans did it when Trump ran for re-election in 2020 as well. Like they said, we're not going to have, there were some people who wanted to challenge him and he said no.
Which is really terrible because it leaves a lot of Americans knowing that if we don't have an ethical course correction in our actual political process, we will not have the almost spiritual fuel and emotional and psychological dynamism to take him on. And I still see Democrats who are thinking, no, we just need to be better fighters. We're not going to counter this extraordinary assault on our democratic freedoms and our humanitarian values just by trying to fight him. They don't fight fair. They're shameless. We're going to do it by inspiring and exciting and reminding people what democracy is and why it's worth.
Well, let's go back to what we were originally talking about a little bit. So like when you say, there's things you've said that I would like to understand a little clearer. You say that that thoughts become physicalized, that thoughts become things. How does that work?
Okay, and this is primary, foundational stuff. The idea is that all thought creates form on some level. The idea is that thought is cause and what's happening out there is in the realm of effect. So in our shallow ways, we're playing whack-a-mole because we're always trying to treat symptoms. But if you only treat symptoms without addressing cause, then new symptoms will always appear. And the cause is, for instance, in this country, a profound disconnection from deep devotion generation after generation. We have forgotten to teach our children. We have forgotten to be the keepers of the story of the deep moral and ethical and spiritual significance of democracy. Once that disconnection has occurred, then Trump-like forces are almost inevitable, and you can't just fight them on the level of the symptom.
Okay, so my thought is, boy, I would love democracy to be more important. How does that take form then?
It's going to take someone who can counter the adrenaline rush that Trump has created. And someone who, Franklin Roosevelt said that we would not have to worry about a fascist takeover as long as democracy delivered on its promises.
Right.
Democracy
hasn't been for a long time.
Exactly. Yeah. And if democracy had delivered on its promises, we would not be the only advanced nation in the world, not even just advanced democracy, advanced nation that has no universal health care, that has over 1 million people rationing their insulin. So the Democratic Party prides itself, well, we've done so good. Insulin is now capped at $35 for people 65 and older. This is the insanity of incrementalism.
Right.
Insulin should be free. We have 1.3 million Americans who are rationing their insulin. A lot of people have diabetes who are under 65. And then that you have to connect to the crap in our food supply and so forth. So we've been taking these little steps rather than seeing and recognizing that even the most rudimentary knowledge of history informs you that large groups of desperate people are a national security risk. They form a petri dish, and out of that petri dish is almost an inevitable amount of personal and societal dysfunction, including attraction to a political strongman.
Back to so thoughts take form. So you're saying thoughts are inspiration to action? Is that what it means?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because your thoughts calibrate, your emotions arise from your thoughts. So your thoughts determine your perspective. And your perspective then determines your feelings and determines your modes of behavior. And also determines how other people perceive you. Because we're all subconscious. Everybody subconsciously knows everything. This is the way reality actually works. And we all know this. You and I are auditioning someone or interviewing someone for a job. They come in. And you and I, this happens every day. One of us says to the other, great resume, great presentation. I'm just not feeling it. Mm-hmm. And there are also times when interview happened and one of us says to the other, I know her resume isn't as good, but I have a good feeling about that woman.
Right.
That is a team player. Mm-hmm. It's so we're all putting out energy all the time that is more than the material. And that had to do with what was happening inside those people. It had to do with their character, had to do with their ethics, had to do with their positivity, had to do with their generosity. So what's happened, and we can look at this historically, it started with the advent of the West, of, the climaxing of Western materialism through the Industrial Revolution, Walt Whitman, Emerson, Thoreau, the Transcendentalists, all of the philosophers in England and America saying, no, don't go there. Our attention got lured. It became a mechanistic, rationalistic perspective at the expense of the inner life. Oh. And that's what the 20th century ended up being. Now, there's a great effort going on to rebalance and to recalibrate because people can see where this got us. Right. We're soulless. Our entire operating system in Western civilization has been hacked by this amoral, soulless strain of capitalism, basically. And so there is, especially among young people, a great effort, yearning, and need to rebalance. And I think among all of us, too, something's so out of control. And we know that there's no 1 or even 5 or even 10 material fixes that are going to change everything.
It does seem that people are seeking out maybe more and more some kind of salve for the automation and roboticness of it. People feel out of control, feel that, they're being phased out.
Well, definitely that.
Yeah.
Last night I saw Death of a Salesman. Look when that play was written and the direction of amoral, ruthless capitalism,
Right.
and what it did in Willie Loman's life and what it did in his marriage and what it did in his family. Things have been moving in that direction for decades. And that's not an anti-capitalist statement.
Right.
This is talking about conscience and ethics. Even Adam Smith, who was the primary architect of free market capitalism, said it cannot exist outside an ethical context. Another piece of art that spoke to this really profoundly was that movie that George Clooney did several years ago with Anna Kendrick, Up in the Air.
Yeah, yeah.
Boy, those scenes.
About people getting fired, yeah.
That, to me, that's one of the great pieces of movie making right there.
Mm-hmm.
That was just astonishing. Yeah, because here, what are the promises? The promises you're going to make enough money, you're going to have a house, and you're going to have a family. Yeah, and the next thing you know, your kid's in rehab, your kid's suicidal, your family is in disharmony. So people know. People are not stupid. Something has really gone too far, and I think people want this spiritual correction.
The problem of, you're right. People have seen that, and a lot of people think, make America great again. Going backwards is the way to fix it, as opposed to trying fixing what's going on now.
I'm a believer in what Eisenhower said when he said the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. There are the fringes on left and right, and then there are high-minded principles of both conservatism and liberalism, and I think we need to reclaim them. Every time I meet a Republican, I say, just bring the soul back to your party, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And every time I see a Democrat, let's bring a soul back to this party, okay?
What do you mean when you say you can only receive what you give away, or what you can?
Okay, so on the material, so there are two realms of experience. It's
Right.
like the mind has split in two. There's one realm of experience, which is the three-dimensional realm, and we're humans, and we're here. And in that, if I give you this, you will have it, and I will no longer have it. But on the realm of the spiritual, which is not only as real but actually more real, if I'm kind to you, not only was there the gift of that kindness, I received the gift as well.
Because you receive something, the joy of giving something, or the
It's more than joy. It's the way the mind operates. It's the exact opposite of the material world. If if you go all the way back to the foundation of this, the idea is that there's really no place where your mind stops and my mind starts. So anything I give you, I actually am giving to myself. Now, there's joy, generosity, and kindness, but there's also meanness, attack, judgment, blame. So, for instance, the Course in Miracles says, if I attack you or judge you or blame you, I think I'm just dropping a sword on your head, but actually I'm dropping a sword on my own.
By virtue of that, if you walk through the world trying to give as much love as you can, or receive love, or operate on that plane, you're getting a lot back.
And that goes back to what you and I first talked about. Just try it and see if it works. You can't, I was once at a seminar, and the seminar leader said, look around the room, and every person that you see, silently say to yourself, the love in me salutes the love in you, or the God in me, or salutes the love in you. And then just move to the next person. Just look at them and think to yourself, the love in me salutes the love in you. The love in me salutes the love in you. Obviously, you don't say it out loud. It's within yourself. And what I've learned is you do that for 2 minutes a day, and I defy you to be unhappy. You can't do it. I travel a lot. So I was going through airports. And so another airport. And then I thought, based on my study and practice of these things, just bless everybody at the airport. And the more I did that, the deeper you go deeper. It's like, I wonder where they're traveling. I wonder what they're going through. I wonder, sometimes I'll say to people at my lectures, think of the most painful moment you've ever been through. And you go, okay. And then I would say to people, it is statistically reasonable to assume that the person to your right has suffered that much too. Mm-hmm. It is statistically reasonable to consider that the person to your left, in front of you, and behind you has suffered that much too. Now look at the room again. It's a different room.
but it's hard to bless somebody who just sold you a $20 water. So that's the airport situation. So you're at the airport and they're selling you $20 waters.
Well, Martin Luther King.
I'm just not that good.
Martin Luther King said, no, Martin Luther King said, God said I have to love him. He didn't say I have to like him.
Well, that's true.
But I was going to add to that.
Yeah.
So I was living in an apartment in New York, and I loved this apartment. It was in this old seminary, and it was like being in a little English village in the middle of Manhattan. It was so beautiful, and I loved it. But the apartment was tiny. So when it came to renew, I need something, you could hardly even move around. Okay. So I got an apartment that has this total cityscape. Right. And I thought that was kind of exciting and very New York and kind of glamorous it felt. So I'm sitting there and saying to myself, I just don't know if I can meditate as easily here because, that English village feel was so calming and restorative. And then I said to myself, Marianne, look at all those buildings. Think of all the people in those buildings. You just look at that building and just bless. The love in me salutes the love in you. And then look at that. And look at that building. I thought, wow, this really is great meditative exercise. Look at that building, that New York building. Look at all the people who live there, the people who work there. Silently bless them. Go to the next one. Look at that one. Look at that. This is amazing. There's so many. And then look at that one. Trump.
Yeah.
Trump
Right.
Tower.
Right.
Right. Practically across, like 2 blocks away. And I laughed out loud. I knew that was quite an exercise. Couldn't get away from it. It was a small apartment. So every day I had the opportunity. And I said to myself, okay, there's no way you're not going to see this. Every day you're here. You're either going to go or you're going to bless him too.
Right. So
doesn't mean you don't disagree with him.
Right.
Doesn't mean you don't do everything possible to make sure he retires in Mar-a-Lago. It just means that you don't
try this.
Engage in the lower level emotionality that ultimately
I will definitely try
help.
this. I'm going to bless so many people. There'll be restraining orders. I promise you. I'm going to do it fully.
Well, there are no restraining orders in that realm.
Not in that realm, but in this realm.
But that's my point. Yeah.
Yes. I'm going to give you an example of something that happened to me 2 days ago.
Okay.
That fried my mind.
Okay.
All right. And you can tell me the heavenly response to this. I went into a store and I ordered a bagel. It was a salt bagel with lox. That place charged me $25 for the salt bagel with lox. And I said, okay, I'll pay it. So I paid the thing, credit card, boop, salt bagel with lox. I only like salt bagels for whatever reason.
It's a thing.
No cream cheese, just salt bagel lox. They, moment later, said, we don't have salt bagels. And I said, okay, well, give me my money back. And they said, we can't. And they said, it's not our policy. We can't give you your money back. You can have another kind of bagel. And I said, I don't want another kind of bagel. I want the one I just ordered.
Oh, wow.
And they said, we don't do that.
Oh, wow.
And I stood in front of the counter. I never do this. I don't complain. I stood in front. I said, you need to give me my money back because it's an outrageous amount of money for something that you're not selling me. And they said, no, you can have a credit or you can have a different sandwich. I said, no, I want my money back. And it blew my brains out. Like I couldn't figure out what to do. I was so angry about this. Like in a way that I'm never angry. These things I roll off. I was furious in that moment. And eventually a nice patron of this place said, I'll give you $25 for your credit because I'm here all the time and you can have your money back. And that's how it was resolved. It was not resolved through the store doing the right thing and just giving me my money back.
Well, you were angry not about the bagel. You were angry about the injustice.
Yes.
And you were right.
What do you do about this injustice?
You were right. There's nothing inherently unloving in the fact that you stood for justice there. Now, how you expressed yourself, I don't know because I wasn't there. If you expressed yourself in a way that was demeaning towards the salesperson or that came across like a personal attack, that is non-loving. But the fact that you took a stand for justice, there's nothing inherently unloving about that. Sometimes love says no. And I think in this world today, there is greater danger in accepting things we should not accept than there is in standing for what we know is right.
I did not say anything untoward to the manager of the place. I
think it's great. So that other patron
snap into a fetal position and just rocked.
And that other person got your credit. So all's well.
It was, except it's just a little bit unsatisfying that the store I didn't get the full justice.
Did you ask to talk to the manager?
I was talking to the manager. Yes.
Ooh.
Yes, I was talking to the manager. I was furious. So that's where I feel like if I was enlightened, though, I might handle it somehow differently. I'm still angry about it. Like I haven't let go of this thing.
No, I'm not so sure. The fact that you have a sense of injustice is not a bad thing.
All right.
That's unjust.
Yeah, I agree.
So sometimes you stand. That's not inherently loving. You know, this idea that love just means, oh, okay, all the time. No, that's not what love necessarily is.
Well, thank you for justifying my anger.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's that or that you and I are both stuck at B+. I'm not sure.
It could be. All right.
Everybody has to decide for themselves.
All right. We have something we call question time. I asked some of my listeners to send in some questions that they want to ask of you. So I'm going to do that. Normally there's a little theme.
It's question time.
The Art of Water says, was there a particular event in her life that pushed her to get into politics?
Yes. Not an event, but a string of events. When my career began here in Los Angeles, I was working very soon after I started lecturing, I was working with people with AIDS. And so the joke became in this town, very few call Marianne because things are going well.
Right.
And I had what I see to have been a real privilege of having been invited into many people's lives in some of their most agonizing hours. But in the first even 2 decades of my career, most of the people I met going through truly horrible situations, that crisis was the exception and not the rule. What I began to realize towards the end of the 1990s, around 2000, was how many people I encountered for whom the crisis was the rule and not the exception. So the problem wasn't just that they had just been diagnosed with cancer. The problem was that they didn't have health care. The problem wasn't just that they couldn't find a job. It's that they couldn't support a family on just one job. And I began to realize, and I had already been very involved in the nonprofit sector, and I realized, wait a minute, no amount of private charity can compensate for what is basically a lack of social justice. This is baked into the cake that what could be argued the majority of Americans live with this constant sense of struggle. You've got 70% of Americans who say that they live with constant economic anxiety. So the system, first of all, it would look at you and me, Jay, and say, what are you complaining about? It's okay for you. Because it always lets in enough to run the system, right? Then the other issue there is that it's baked into the cake that public policy is what it is. And then the same people who make those public policies turn to people like me, nonprofit, clergy, spiritual counselors, whatever, and say, well, we hope you can help people cope during these difficult times. And I'd be turning to U.S. senators and going, not difficult for you.
Right.
What are you talking about? One senator once said to me, Miss Williamson, do you think there's something you could suggest that we do about the mental health crisis? I looked at her and I said, yeah, stop driving everybody crazy. You know, and I realized that until you get your hands on the levers of power, then there's just so much you can do from the outside.
Right. And funding mental health, help and
yes, but even the fact that so many people have a mental health crisis, that's a symptom and not a cause.
Helen asks, ask her about her dad and how his perspective on life shaped her worldview.
My father used to walk around the house, beat the system, kids, beat the system. I was 60 years old when I called my brother and I said, I don't think Daddy was kidding when he said that. Peter said, yeah, absolutely he wasn't kidding. My father had been raised in poverty. I have a great story for you.
Please.
So my father was a union organizer in the 1930s for the CIO, before it was the AFL-CIO, trying to unionize the Detroit Ford Motor Plant. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, it was the 30s, and he went one night to check out a meeting of the Communist Party, right? My father was not a communist, but at that time was what communism was, and he went to a meeting. So there was this other guy there.
I'm sure I had relatives who were communists.
I'm sure.
I'm positive.
It was the whole,
if they were Jewish and living in New York at a certain point, you were just communist.
So my father, there was this other man who was there as well. And both of them were there for the first time. And when they started speaking, the person who was leading the meeting said, get out, you're too intellectual. Because something was said, and these two men said, well, I don't know about this or that. Right. Get out, you're too intellectual. So my father walked out of the meeting with this other guy they'd both been kicked at. And the other man said to my father, hey, Sam, you want to go have a drink? And he said, sure, let's go have a drink. and they had a drink. And the big joke in my family was my father said, I knew that night he'd never turn into anything. Because my father would say he'd turn into anything. Tennessee Williams.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I love that story about my father.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that is fantastic, isn't it?
Before we go, we have one more thing, which is I ask every guest, tell me something that brings you joy. It's a moment of joy.
A moment of joy.
What brings you joy? And I exclude your daughter or your grandkids.
I was going to say my grandbaby.
No, you can't say the grandbaby. Can't say the family. It's something else. What gives you joy?
I'm at a point in my life where there's quiet joy in just knowing that a situation turned out well. And there's also a certain kind of hours late at night when the clutter of the mental clutter that assaults everyone all day, just an assault on everybody's impulse control, when you feel things slowing down, maybe you're even got your computer in bed, you're ready, you can think, or you're reading a really good book. So many of the outer experiences that we think of as, I've been fortunate enough to have been through a lot of things, and I'm quieter, but almost more fierce joy is what I feel grateful for now.
You should explain to your cousin Brown about quiet joy.
Yeah.
She has noisy joy. She has very noisy joy. I love it, but it's very noisy joy. All right. Well,
that's your job.
That is my job. It's true. It's true. Well, thank you for being here.
Thank
you for writing 1 million books on love and getting your head right and getting your life right. And, the newest one is The Mystic Jesus. Which is, I haven't read yet, to be fair, but I'm going to read because I do love your work and I do love The Course of Miracles and I do find solace in it. Even when I don't fully buy into everything, there's truth there. There's absolutely truth that you can see and feel and operate your life on. And that really is very helpful to me.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thanks for being here. And thanks for being my cousin.
It's fun being your mishpacha.
All right. And thank you for being here. Please tune in again to the show. Send it to other people. Share it, like it, subscribe to it. And if you have a question, write to dbawjk@gmail.com for all your Jake Hogan needs. We'll see you next time.